The suitcase would not close. Kioma pressed her knee into the leather and yanked the zipper again, and again it caught on the sleeve of a blue silk blouse, the one she had worn on her first day in this house 4 years ago. Her hands were not shaking because she was sad. They were shaking because she was trying so hard not to laugh, and laughing at a moment like this would be insane, and she was many things tonight, but insane was not one of them. Downstairs, a woman's voice rose sharp enough to rattle the chandelier. She has been eating my son's money for 4 years, and she cannot even close a bag properly. That was her mother-in-law. Madame Yunhee had a gift for turning insults into public announcements, as if the household staff standing frozen by the staircase were a jury she needed to convince. Kioma finally got the zipper shut. She stood, smoothed the front of her dress, and looked at herself in the mirror one last time. Her eyes were dry. That surprised her more than anything else that had happened in the last 2 hours. 2 hours ago, her husband had walked into the dining room holding a folder of divorce papers the way other men held flowers, and told her that their marriage was, in his exact words, an arrangement that has run its course. An arrangement. 4 years of her life filed under arrangement. She had asked him one question, only one. Is there someone else? And Kang Teo, heir to one of the most feared names in Seoul's business world, a man who could silence a boardroom with a raised eyebrow, could not look her in the eye when he answered. That is not the point, Kioma. Which, as anyone with sense knows, is the answer men give when the answer is yes and they are too much of a coward to say it. She carried her suitcase down the stairs herself. No one offered to help. The staff had been instructed, apparently, that helping the outgoing wife carry her bags was now a fireable offense. At the bottom of the stairs, Madame Yunhee was waiting with her arms crossed and her chin lifted, the exact posture of a woman who had rehearsed this scene in a mirror. I told my son not to marry a foreigner. I told him nothing good comes from the streets of Lagos. Nigeria, Kioma said. Lagos is a city, Nigeria is the country. I know geography is difficult when your whole world is the size of this compound. Somewhere behind her, one of the maids made a sound like a cough that was actually a laugh badly disguised. Madame Yunhee's face went the color of the wine she had been drinking all evening. Get out of my house. With pleasure, Kioma said, and meant it more than the older woman would ever understand. Teo stood by the door, arms folded, jaw tight, looking at everything in the room except his wife, soon-to-be ex-wife. He had not said a single word since she came down the stairs. He didn't need to. His silence had always been louder than his voice. That was one of the first things she learned about him, back when silence from him used to feel like safety, not cruelty. She stopped in front of him, close enough to smell the cologne she had bought him for his birthday, the one he still wore even though he was throwing her out on the same night. You will regret this, she said quietly, not a threat. A fact delivered the way a doctor delivers a diagnosis. He almost smiled, almost. Is that so? Tomorrow, she said, you will understand exactly what you just did. He didn't ask what she meant. He simply opened the door and let the cold air rush in, and Kioma walked out of the only home she'd had in Seoul for 4 years, into a night that smelled like rain and felt like the beginning of something enormous. What Kang Teo did not know, what none of them in that grand marble house knew, was that the woman they had just thrown into the street with one suitcase, and no driver was, at that very moment, the sitting chairwoman of Belmore Holdings, the single largest private conglomerate in South Korea, quietly worth more than the Kang family's entire empire 3 times over, under a different name, behind a different face, at least in public. Kioma Adiz Bello had built and inherited an empire that even the National Tax Service didn't fully understand, and not one person in that house had ever thought to ask their poor, quiet, foreign daughter-in-law what she actually did on the days she left before sunrise and returned after midnight. They thought she was a struggling freelance translator. She let them think it. Tonight, that was about to end. She got into the taxi at the end of the driveway, gave an address that was not the modest guest house everyone believed she rented, and dialed a number she hadn't called in weeks, not because she didn't want to, but because a woman running 2 entire lives does not always have time to call her best friend and cry about her marriage. The call picked up on the second ring. Don't tell me, said the voice on the other end, thick with sleep and instant alertness at the same time, the way only true friends can manage. He finally did it. He finally did it, Kioma said. Chai, that boy has more money than sense. Where are you now? In a taxi heading to the penthouse. Good. Don't cry in the taxi. The driver will think Nigerians are dramatic people. Bimp, we are dramatic people. Yes, but he doesn't need to know that from you specifically. Despite everything, despite the suitcase still smelling faintly of T.O.'s cologne where it had brushed against her coat, despite the ache sitting behind her ribs that she refused to name yet, Keoma laughed. A real laugh, the kind that surprised her own chest. "Tomorrow at 9, Bimp said, suddenly all business, the way she always could switch, 1 second gossiping like they were in university again, the next second sharp as a blade. "The board is expecting you. The press release goes out at 9:30. Are you ready?" Keoma looked out the window at the city sliding past, glass towers lit gold against the dark, one of which she owned, though its tenants had no idea. "I have been ready for 4 years, she said. "I was just waiting for a good enough reason to stop hiding. And a man throwing you out in the rain with one suitcase counts as a good enough reason. Bimp. It is the perfect reason. To understand how a Nigerian woman ended up married into one of Seoul's most powerful and most dangerous families, you have to go back 4 years, to a restaurant with too much marble and not enough warmth, where Keoma had gone only because her assistant insisted she eat an actual meal instead of another protein bar at her desk. She was 26 then, already running Belmore in secret under her mother's old instructions, still learning the particular exhaustion of being the most powerful person in a room, while everyone in that room believed the opposite. She sat alone at a corner table with her laptop open, eating japchae with one hand and reviewing a merger contract with the other, when 4 men in dark suits walked past her table far too quickly, and one of them bumped her water glass onto her keyboard. She looked up, ready to be irritated, and found herself looking instead at a man sliding into the booth across from her uninvited, breathing hard, straightening his jacket like nothing at all had just happened. "Do you mind," he said, not really a question, "if I sit here for exactly 4 minutes? "I do mind, actually. 3 minutes and 50 seconds now." Before she could respond, 2 more men walked past the front window, scanning the restaurant with the particular focus of men looking for someone specific. The man across from her did not turn around. He simply reached for her cup of tea and drank from it like they were old friends catching up. "Are you being chased?" Keoma asked, mostly out of morbid curiosity, "by actual criminals, or is this a metaphor I'm supposed to understand? Depends on your definition of criminal." "I have a very flexible definition tonight, apparently." The men outside moved on. He exhaled and for the first time actually looked at her properly, and something in his face shifted, the way a person's face shifts when they walk into a room expecting one thing and find something far more interesting instead. "Kang Tio," he said, extending a hand. "You drank my tea before you told me your name. An efficient man. A rude one." He smiled then, and it was the kind of smile that should have come with a warning label, the kind that had probably ended several other women's common sense before hers. "Let me buy you dinner, as an apology for the tea and the water on your laptop and being rude. I have a merger to finish. I have a family that will try to marry me off to someone worse than you within the month if I don't find a distraction. You'd be doing me a favor." She should have said no. She has told Bimp 100 times since that she should have said no. But there was something about a man who ran from danger and still made time for jokes, something about the particular tiredness behind his eyes that matched her own, that made her close her laptop instead. 30 minutes, she said, "and you're paying for the water damage." That was how it started. Neither of them knew that night that they were both hiding an entire world from each other, that his family's business had ties to men who did not settle disagreements in courtrooms, and that hers was an empire so large it could crush his family without even trying if it ever wanted to. For a while, it was easy to pretend that none of it mattered. She remembers the night he told her, 3 months into dating, that his family was not simply in construction and shipping the way the newspapers said. They were sitting on the rooftop of his apartment building, and he had gone quiet in a way that frightened her, because T.O. was rarely quiet unless something was about to change. "There are things about my family," he said, "that I need you to understand before this goes any further. My father does not just do business. He protects business for people who need protecting, and sometimes that protection is not gentle." "Are you telling me you're in the Mafia, T.O.? "I'm telling you my family is adjacent to something like that. And it comes with danger, real danger. If you stay with me, that danger becomes yours too." She had looked at him for a long time that night, weighing a decision that would change everything, and had said something she still believed, even now, even after everything. "I did not survive what I survived to be scared of danger, T.O. Try me." She never told him what she had survived. She never told him about the boardroom battles fought before she turned 25, about men twice her age who had tried to steal her mother's company right out from under her the week her mother died, about learning to smile at people while planning quietly, precisely, how to dismantle them. She let him believe she was brave because of something small, some ordinary hardship, when really she was brave because she had already been tested by fire far hotter than anything his family could produce. 3 weeks after that rooftop conversation, 4 men with guns showed up outside the restaurant where they were having dinner, sent by a rival family called Choi. Men who had spent a decade trying to destroy the Kang family's shipping routes and were done being patient about it. T.O. had thrown himself in front of her before she even understood what was happening, taken a graze along his shoulder from a bullet that should have taken more. And still, even bleeding, even furious, his first words to her had been a question. "Are you hurt? Keoma, are you hurt?" Not "am I hurt?" Not "call an ambulance for me." Her first, always her first. That was the night she fell in love with him properly, foolishly, completely, the kind of love that makes intelligent women do reckless things, like agreeing to marry a man from a dangerous family while hiding that she ran an empire 10 times the size of his. She told herself at the wedding, standing in a hanbok with gold thread stitched through white silk, that she would tell him the truth eventually. When things were calmer, when the danger from the Choi family settled, when she trusted that he loved Keoma the woman, and not whatever version of wealth or power she might represent. She was still waiting for that eventually, 4 years later, when he handed her divorce papers across the dining table like a business document and called their marriage an arrangement that had run its course. She understood, sitting in the back of that taxi with her one suitcase, that eventually had simply run out of time. The Belmore Holdings Tower did not announce itself the way other buildings in Gangnam did, with glowing logos and glass that screamed for attention. It sat quiet and dark blue against the skyline, understated on purpose, the way real power usually is. At 6 the next morning, Keoma walked through its private entrance for the first time not as a visitor slipping in through the back, but as herself, fully, publicly, for the first time in 4 years. Security guards who had known her for years as the chairwoman, but had never once seen her look this tired still straightened immediately and bowed. "Annyeonghaseyo hojangnim?" "Annyeonghaseyo," she said back, and even that small greeting felt strange this morning, like putting on a coat that finally fit after years of wearing something 2 sizes too small. Bimp was already waiting by the elevator with 2 coffees, one black, one with too much sugar, exactly the way Keoma liked hers when the world had gone sideways. "You look like you slept in a hotel lobby." "I slept in a hotel lobby. Keoma. I did not want to go to the mansion alone last night. It felt like admitting the marriage actually ended, and I was not ready to admit anything to an empty house at midnight." Bimp's face softened, just for a second, before she caught herself and snapped back into business mode, because that was how she showed love, through efficiency instead of hugging. "The board is assembled. The press release is scheduled for 9:30 sharp. Legal has confirmed everything. All you have to do is walk in, sit down, and be exactly who you already are." "That's the hardest part." "No," Bimp said, pressing the elevator button. "The hardest part was surviving 4 years married into a family that called you an aunt behind your back while you quietly owned half the buildings they parked their cars in front of. This part is easy. This part is just paperwork." The boardroom on the top floor held 12 people who had known the truth for years, sworn to a level of confidentiality that came with contracts thicker than most novels. When Keoma walked in, they all stood, the way they always did, and for the first time in a long while she let herself feel it fully instead of rushing past it. This was hers. Every floor, every contract, every decision that shaped industries across 3 countries. Hers, built from a foundation her mother had laid, and that she had spent a decade expanding without asking anyone's permission. The chairman of the executive committee, a stern older man named Director Han who had worked for her mother before her, cleared his throat. "Ho Jang-nim, are you certain about today? Once your identity is public, there is no retreating from it. The Choi family will know exactly who you are, and exactly what leverage that gives them if they ever wanted to hurt the Kang family through you." Keoma sat at the head of the table and folded her hands. "Director Han, I have been quiet for 4 years to protect a marriage that ended last night over dinner, because my husband decided I was an arrangement that had run its course. I am done being quiet to protect people who do not protect me back. And the danger. I have survived danger before. I will survive it again, but I refuse to spend one more day hiding my own name inside my own life." Someone near the end of the table, a younger board member named Miss Park, raised a hand slightly, the way a student does when she is nervous but has to ask anyway. "Ho Jang-nim, if I may, is it true the Kang Group is the primary shipping contractor for our upcoming Busan port acquisition?" The room went very quiet. Kioma allowed herself a small, dangerous smile, the kind her mother used to wear right before closing a deal that would change an industry. Yes, she said. As of this morning's board vote, Belmore Holdings now owns 42% of Kang Group's outstanding shares, purchased quietly over the last 18 months through 3 separate holding companies, which makes us, as of 9:30 this morning, their largest single shareholder. Director Hand's eyebrows lifted so high they nearly left his face. You bought shares in your own husband's company. My ex-husband's company, Kioma corrected. And yes, I did it 18 months ago, long before the divorce, because their shipping division was undervalued and their leadership was making reckless decisions with debt. It was a good investment. It had nothing to do with him. And now, Kioma said, standing, straightening her blazer, feeling something settle into place in her chest for the first time since last night. Now it has everything to do with him. Let's go tell the world who their chairwoman really is. At 9:30 exactly, the press release went out across every major outlet in South Korea, and by 9:32, it had already crossed into international business news, because a story this good does not stay contained to one country. Belmore Holdings announces Chairwoman Kioma Adiz Bello, Nigerian business leader behind country's largest private conglomerate, steps into public role following years of discreet leadership. Across the city, in the Kang Group's executive offices, T.O. was in a meeting about the very shipping contracts that had just quietly changed hands, when his assistant burst through the door without knocking, phone held up, face pale. Sajangnam, you need to see this. I am in the middle of a meeting. Sajangnam, it's about your wife. My ex-wife, T.O. corrected, irritated, and unless she has done something newsworthy, which I doubt this can wait. His assistant simply turned the phone screen toward him. The photograph on it was Kioma. His Kioma, standing at a podium in a sharp black suit he had never seen before, flanked by 12 board members, a banner behind her reading BELMORE Holdings in gold letters, the same gold letters that were, at that very moment, stamped across the top of the shipping contract sitting open on his desk. For 3 full seconds, Kang Teo did not breathe. His mother, watching the same broadcast on the television in her sitting room across the city with her morning tea halfway to her lips, made a sound that the housekeeper would later describe, very carefully, as not quite human. The teacup hit the floor before the sentence, "She is the Belmore chairwoman," had even finished playing on the anchor's lips. It was, according to the housekeeper, the single most graceful thing Madame Yunhee had ever destroyed by accident, and also possibly the funniest thing the poor woman had witnessed in 15 years of employment, though she was careful not to smile where her employer could see. In the boardroom, T.O.'s father, who had signed off on the Busan shipping deal without asking too many questions about the mysterious buyer behind 3 separate holding companies, went the color of old paper. "Tell me," he said slowly, to the room at large, to no one, to God, "that this is a coincidence." It was not a coincidence. By noon, Belmore Holdings' legal team had sent formal notice to Kang Group requesting an emergency shareholder meeting, standard procedure for any entity that had just crossed the 40% ownership threshold. By 1, financial news anchors across the country were calling it the business story of the decade. The quiet queen who married into the very company she secretly controlled. By 2, Kioma's name was trending in 3 countries, and somewhere in a comment section she would never read, a young Nigerian girl in Lagos wrote, "This is why you should never let anybody make you feel small. You never know who you're really talking to." And it was liked 40,000 times before the sun went down in Seoul. T.O. called her phone 11 times that afternoon. She let all 11 calls go to voicemail, sitting calmly in her office with Bimp beside her, going through quarterly reports as though the entire city was not currently on fire with her name. "He's going to show up here," Bimp said, not looking up from her tablet. "Men like him always show up in person once calling stops working. Let him come." "Are you ready for that?" Kioma set down her pen and looked out the window at the skyline gold light bending off the glass towers, one of which technically belonged to her. "I built an empire while married to a man who called it an arrangement," she said quietly. "I have been ready for this conversation for 4 years, Bimp. I just didn't know it would happen the same week." He did come. Not that afternoon, and not the next day either, because even a man raised with too much confidence needs time to recover from discovering his ex-wife owns almost half his company. But 3 days later, on the evening Kioma finally moved the last of her belongings into the mansion in Seongbukdong that had sat quietly under a shell company's name for 6 years, waiting for the day she would need it. The house was enormous in the way old Korean estates managed to be enormous without ever feeling cold, wide wooden beams. A garden that had been designed by the same landscape architect who did 2 former presidents' residences. A koi pond her mother would have loved. And a security detail that Keoma had personally trained herself to be discreet enough that most visitors never noticed them at all. She was standing in the main hall, directing where a set of her mother's old paintings should hang, when one of her security guards' earpiece crackled, and he stepped toward her with the particular tension of a man who has just been told something he doesn't like. "Ho Jang-nim, there is a car outside the gate. Black sedan, no license plate visible. It has been parked for 11 minutes. Keoma's spine straightened. "Kang family or Choi family? We're not certain yet." That was the trouble with a life built the way hers had been. Danger did not announce itself politely. It simply idled outside your gate at 11 minutes and counting, and you had to decide whether it was an ex-husband or an assassin before you opened the door. It turned out in the end to be both problems arriving on the same night, though not in the way anyone expected. The gate buzzer rang first. On the small security screen, Keoma saw T.O. standing alone, no bodyguards, hands in his coat pockets, looking up at a house he clearly had not known existed, the confusion on his face almost comical for a man usually so composed. "Let him in," Keoma said. "Just him." He stood at the door and stared at the entrance hall for a long moment, taking in the paintings, the imported marble, the quiet, obvious weight of old money that had clearly been in this family for longer than his own fortune had existed. "You had this," he said finally, "this whole time." "I had a lot of things this whole time, T.O. 6 years, according to the property records my lawyer pulled this morning. 6 years you owned this house while living in mine, letting my mother call you a beggar at dinner, letting me think." He stopped, ran a hand through his hair, and for once in his life looked genuinely lost. "Letting me think you needed me. I never once said I needed you," Keoma said. "I said I loved you. Those are different things, and I would think a man raised in your family would understand the difference between love and dependence." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because the first time I mentioned, casually, that I had connections in shipping investment, your mother laughed so hard she nearly choked on her wine and told me foreign women should stick to things they understand, like cooking. Because every time I tried to speak in a business meeting your father hosted at our house, you changed the subject to something lighter, as if my opinions were an inconvenience at your table. Because I learned very quickly, T.O., that this family had already decided who I was before I ever opened my mouth, and nothing I said was going to change that decision." He was quiet for a long moment, and to his credit, he did not argue, did not defend his family, simply stood there absorbing something that was clearly landing harder than the divorce papers he'd handed her 3 nights earlier. "I came here," he said finally, "to ask why you're taking my company." "I'm not taking your company. I'm your largest shareholder. If your leadership continues making the decisions it's been making, particularly borrowing against the Busan port contract without securing it first, I will have grounds to intervene. That is not personal, T.O., that is just good business." "It feels personal. Everything feels personal to a man who has never once had power taken away from him." She said it without cruelty, simply as a fact, the way she had learned to say difficult things in boardrooms where softness got mistaken for weakness. "Welcome to how the rest of us live." He almost laughed, a short, surprised sound, the kind that escapes a person even when they're trying to be angry. "Egu, you really have been running circles around all of us this whole time, haven't you? For 4 years. And the divorce was your decision, not mine." She folded her arms. "You threw me out over dinner because your mother convinced you I was an embarrassment. That has nothing to do with Belmore. That has to do with the fact that you let your family decide the value of your own wife, instead of deciding it for yourself." Whatever he was going to say next was interrupted by the sound of glass breaking, sharp and sudden, from the back of the house, followed immediately by the security lead's voice cutting through the earpiece so loudly that even Keoma, several feet away, could hear it. "Ho Jang-nim, get down. We have intruders, East Garden entrance at least 3, armed." T.O. moved before she did, instinct taking over 4 years of marriage and 3 days of hurt in a single motion, pulling her behind him toward the wall, positioning his own body between her and the hallway that led to the garden. "Choi family," he said grimly. "It has to be. They've been waiting for a reason to make a move against my father for months, and now with Belmore's name attached to mine publicly, you've just become the biggest target in Seoul." "I am not a target, T.O. I am a chairwoman with a security team trained for exactly this." As if to prove her point, the sound of controlled, professional gunfire and shouted commands came from the garden, followed swiftly by silence, followed by her security lead's voice again, calmer this time. Ho-Jang-Nim, situation contained. 3 intruders subdued, 1 in custody, medical is checking for injuries on our side, none reported. T.O. stared at her, chest still heaving from adrenaline, clearly recalibrating everything he thought he understood about the woman standing in front of him. Your security neutralized 3 armed men in under 90 seconds, he said slowly. I told you, Keoma said, straightening her blazer with hands that this time were not shaking at all. I did not survive what I survived to be scared of danger. What exactly did you survive, Keoma? Before me, you've never told me. She looked at him for a long moment, and something in her chest, the part she had kept locked since the night he handed her those divorce papers, loosened just slightly, not enough to forgive him, not yet, but enough to answer honestly. A boardroom coup, 3 attempted hostile takeovers, 1 kidnapping attempt when I was 23 that I do not discuss at dinner parties, and my mother's death, all before I turned 25. I survived being underestimated by every man who ever sat across a table from me. I think, T.O., I can survive a divorce. He was quiet, and in that quiet, something passed between them that was not quite forgiveness and not quite anger either. Something more complicated, the particular ache of 2 people realizing they had loved each other honestly while lying to each other constantly, and neither of them yet knew what to do with that realization. I should go, he said finally, before my father hears about tonight and decides to make things worse. T.O., he turned back at the door. The man your security caught, Keoma said. Have your father's people question him carefully. If this really was the Choi family, they didn't send 3 men to a private residence just to make a point. They sent them because they wanted something or someone. I don't think tonight is over. He nodded slowly, and for just a moment the mask of cool composure slipped, and underneath it was something that looked almost like fear, not for himself. Be careful, he said. Whatever we are now, ex-husband, largest shareholder, whatever word fits, I don't want anything to happen to you. I know, Keoma said quietly. That was never the problem, T.O. The problem was you never let that caring show up when it actually mattered. He left without another word, and Keoma stood in the doorway of her mansion, watching his car disappear down the long driveway, danger settled but not gone. Love bruised but somehow, infuriatingly, still breathing, and somewhere behind her. Bimp appeared with 2 cups of tea, and the particular expression of a woman who had watched the entire exchange from the security monitors. So, Bimp said, handing her a cup, are we doing the thing where you pretend you don't still love him, or the thing where you actually admit it? I don't know yet. Keoma. The man threw himself in front of gunmen for you tonight, after finding out you're richer than his entire family. That's either true love or the best acting performance I've seen since University Drama Club. Despite everything, Keoma laughed, tired and real, and looked out at the garden where the last traces of tonight's chaos were being quietly cleaned up by her security team. The koi pond glowing gold under the outdoor lights. The house that had waited 6 years to finally hold her standing solid and warm behind her. Ask me again tomorrow, she said. Tonight I just want to sit in my own house in my own name and not owe anybody an explanation for it. Fair enough, Ho-Jang-Nim. Bimp raised her cup in a small toast. To the woman who got thrown out with 1 suitcase and came back with an entire empire. To surviving, Keoma said, and drank her tea in the house that had always been hers, waiting patiently through every quiet, hidden year for exactly this moment. Whether Kang T.O. would earn his way back into her life. Whether the Choi family's attack tonight was the beginning of something far larger. And what Keoma's own mother had really intended when she built Belmore into an empire meant to survive anything. Even heartbreak, even betrayal, even gunfire in a quiet garden in Seongbukdong. That is a story still being written. But if there is one thing Keoma Adiz Bello has proven, from Lagos to Seoul, from a struggling translator's cover story to a chairwoman's podium, it is this. Never, ever mistake a woman's silence for weakness. Sometimes silence is simply a queen deciding when the world deserves to know her name. If this story moved you, if you felt Keoma's strength in your own chest, drop a comment and tell me what you would have done in her position. Hit subscribe so you don't miss what happens next between Keoma and T.O., because this is only the beginning. And if you want to see exactly how far she goes to protect everything she built, stay close, because the next chapter is coming, and it is even more dangerous than tonight.